what is critical thinking? Critical thinking is the intellectually disciplined process of actively and skillfully conceptualizing, applying, analyzing, synthesizing, and or evaluating information gathered from or generated by observation, experience, reflection, reasoning, or communication as a guide to belief and action. So that's certainly one definition. That is a definition from 1987 from the National Council for Excellence in Critical Thinking. So there's not necessarily one, if you were to say, what is leadership, for example, there's not maybe one definition of it, but I like this definition of it. So what's the importance of it and what's the relevance of it? In 1955, Fortune magazine listed 500, every year they list the Fortune 500. So in 1955, the 500 companies that were listed, 60 years later, there's only 71 of those companies still on that list. And so an American Management Association survey of over 2,000 executives and managers identified critical thinking as the most important skill. Would it have made a difference for some of those companies or not? Don't know, but we'll certainly talk about that a lot over this next, let's say 45 minutes or so. So here's some case studies, and we'll kind of go through these. Blockbuster Video, for example. Back in the day when I was growing up, even in Cerritos down the street, South Street and Pioneer, they had the Warehouse, and the Warehouse was $1 a day every day. And all of a sudden, Blockbuster and Hollywood Video came out and they said, hey, we'll let you guys rent videos for more. Why do you have to give it back the same day? You can keep it for 3 days or 5 days, so you can keep it for the week. And so that became an innovation, and Warehouse eventually went under. Well, what happened to Blockbuster? Netflix. And so you'll see Netflix started sending videos that you would have rented from Blockbuster, and Blockbuster didn't innovate. They didn't apply what I would say critical thinking skills and do something different. So all of a sudden, it was too late when they finally tried an online option in 2004. It was too late, and then in September 23rd of 2010, Blockbuster filed for bankruptcy. The next case study, Xerox. So Xerox is as famous as the Sony Walkman, for example, the handheld device where you listen to the radio we called the Walkman, and it became synonymous as the Walkman. When we go to the internet and we want to do a search, we all refer to it as a Google search. Same thing. When you want to make a photocopy, we all have referred to it as a Xerox copy. So Xerox was a very viable, large company. And at the time when other companies were trying to innovate and do things other than just document copying, Xerox gave away their technology. They went all in on the fact that they had this Xerox 914 photocopier. And so as it turned out, other companies like Apple, Microsoft, Hewlett-Packard borrowed the technology that was freely given to Xerox inside of it. And Xerox, don't even know if they're around anymore, but they certainly didn't realize their potential, I would say. Next, Borders Books, or any bookstore for that matter. You can say Borders, Barnes & Nobles, or any of those. Same thing. They launched their first store in Ann Arbor, Michigan, 1971. Back then, obviously, none of us knew what a Kindle or a Nook or any of that stuff was. And now, 40, 50 years later, obviously, everything's changed. You can read books on your phone, and you can use use a tablet and things like that. So by the time Borders started to get into that realm, it was too late. They didn't adopt the new technologies. And so there was a Time article on this, and they instead tried to focus on music sales. And in doing so, they went out of business. Next, the BlackBerry. I was somebody who used to use what we called a CrackBerry. So obviously, texting nonstop, we would do that. And I didn't even want to change and go into an iPhone. Functionality of BlackBerry, a lot of that, and thought that they had market share, and their market share dwindled down to today less than 1% of the smartphone market share. Next, Yahoo. Again, same thing. They didn't focus on a big environment where folks can do anything other than, search for content. And they did own 21% of the online advertising market, but now they're essentially number 4 behind Google, Facebook, and Microsoft, even though they should have been arguably the ones at the top, but they didn't see the importance of search per se. They were very focused on being a media giant. So next. And so continuing on that thread, Google in 2002 reportedly struck a deal for Yahoo to buy them for $5 billion. And Yahoo didn't do it. DoubleClick was the dominant player in display ads through the 90s, and buying DoubleClick would have helped Yahoo strengthen the display ads. They didn't move quickly on that. Facebook in 06, Yahoo had a deal to buy them for $1 billion. And Facebook, and they didn't do it. And Facebook, as we all know, is worth more than 150 times that. So I put a little takeaway here. Had a few of these situations gone differently, we might be Yahooing instead of Googling. Next. The post office, for example, same thing. Now that's a little bit different in the sense that they do have certain regulations, and yeah, they lose money all the time, but they're still going to stay viable. But certainly they haven't been able to do what competitors have done, like UPS, FedEx, DHL, and others. Next, Polaroid. I was somebody who also had a Polaroid camera years ago. Same thing. They didn't innovate, do something different. They didn't really adapt to digital photography. They were very focused on the technology they had of that instant print. And so they filed for bankruptcy in 2001. Next. MySpace, they were the first before Facebook, actually. And in fact, I had a MySpace account before Facebook, but they died very quickly. Facebook focused on what people actually were interested in, which were groups and things like that. And everyone migrated over to Facebook, and sort of the rest is history there. Next. Hostess, we all used to have our Twinkie bars and things like that. Same thing, they just focused really on that, and the society evolved and changed, into a healthy eating craze, if you will. And Hostess made 2 major errors, and they failed to innovate to new and healthier foods, and they didn't even attempt to do anything like that. And they essentially, in 2012, closed their doors after 2 bankruptcies. Next. The entire publishing industry, of course, in general, slow to adapt and to move on. I mean, how many people now in this day and age actually get a newspaper, for example? And even if you do, and I stubbornly continue to get a Sunday paper for a while, get some coupons out of it or whatever. Even that I don't do anymore. Again, people no longer need the newspaper to look at classified ads for jobs, or .com or LinkedIn or Craigslist or whatever. Next. So, that's some examples. That's 10 examples. There's many more examples. But the big takeaway I put here is at the bottom. And somebody once said this to me. Actually, I heard it maybe 20, 25 years ago. But they were talking about General Motors, and they said the biggest curse to a company is 50 years of success. And so the big thumb rule there was don't get complacent. And ultimately, it's when folks get complacent that they typically get overtaken. And Carrie and I were talking a little bit prior to just earlier this week about this fireside chat. And we're saying, like even when you check into a hotel, back in the day, there'd be a big sign that said, hey, color TV. And so, hey, that's cool. They got color TV. Later it was, hey, we got HBO, or ESPN or TNT. And then later it was, we have internet. Now it's who doesn't expect their hotel to have a color TV plus premium channels, plus internet, plus air conditioning. I mean, that's all expected. And so what's the next thing that the industry is going to do to evolve, to continue to grow, to continue to cater to the needs of where the market's going? And so that's really the lens or the framework where you can see that theme of these different countries, or companies or industry areas where they didn't do that next level of thinking and evolving. Next. So why do companies fail? There's a professor from Dartmouth, Vijay Govindarajan, and he said that he co-authored a book called The Other Side of Innovation. He said successful companies tend to fall into three traps: the physical trap, the psychological trap, and the strategic trap. So what are those traps? The physical trap, it's when big investments in old systems or equipment prevent the pursuit of fresher or more relevant investments. The psychological trap, where they fixate on what's made them successful. Hey, what got us here is going to get us there. When in reality, most of us are educated enough to know, hey, what got you here probably won't get you there. And then the strategic trap is they focus purely on the market of today and not necessarily of where the market is heading. I can tell you at Raytheon, we do some things called spiral development. And what's a spiral development? It's like we are actually planning for things where the technology doesn't even exist today. And we're planning for the future, as opposed to just planning for and executing to the needs of today. Next. So the other side, there are a lot of great examples of companies that have imbibed innovation or have done things differently. Southwest, you certainly don't have a seat assignment, one type of aircraft. They were very focused for many, many years. In any case study you'd read about, they would only expand 2 cities a year. One type of aircraft lowers all their maintenance costs. All employees were treated equal. The pilots would carry bags also and load bags on aircraft. And things like that. And then they also innovated and actually hedged fuel years and years ago when prices went all the way up to $5 a gallon. Southwest did this big hedge on fuel and made billions of dollars locking in lower rates for fuel when all other airlines did not do that. General Electric, Jack Welch, when he was there, used to have this thing called number one, number two. Regardless of what markets they were in, he said, if we're not number one or number two in the market, we're out. And so he was very focused on that, and they kept growing to become almost $1 trillion company, GE, during Jack Welch's regime. And then there's other examples as well. You've seen Disney has the Magic Kingdom, and they'll paint their stuff every night. Even they'll continue to make sure that it is the happiest place on earth. That was always Walt Disney. It's all about the happiest place on earth. And Walt Disney himself said when they built Disney World in a swamp in Florida, he said, you know what? Why does the happiest place on earth have to be in a town in Southern California? Why can't the happiest place on earth also be in a swamp in Kissimmee, Florida? And then he built the castle up 2 years before the park actually opened, and it cost him $35 million to build that up, because he wanted people to tangibly feel and experience what the happiest place on earth would look like and feel like. And he sold to his board that they would get that money back that first year, whatever they expected to get, plus 35 million. And they did. So, and then there's other examples up at Saudi Arabia. I had traveled there for work, and their new king has this vision for 2030 of trying to evolve and change with the times, because they are very different from mainstream society per se. And some of the measures that he's putting in place with the right for women to vote, now they're having movie theaters opening up in the country and becoming more mainstream in that regard, and academia in general. In fact, if it wasn't for distance learning or global education programs or virtual classrooms, what would we do now during this COVID crisis in reality? My son, Carrie mentioned, is in college. As soon as all this stuff happened, they all went to virtual classrooms. And I'm a professor, of course, at Upper. We went to virtual classrooms. So there are places and companies that have done it right and are continuing to grow, and they're continuing to be very viable. And of course, I didn't mention Apple and Toyota, but they're of course big ones on that list. Toyota has the production system, and they've strongly innovated that and reinvented themselves from how bad their quality was in the 60s to now being the benchmark for quality. And then Apple, obviously, all the innovations they've had with the iPhone and the iWatch and you name it. So, okay, so that's enough of that. Now I was going to get into a little bit of inventory and assessments and kind of just cycle through this a little bit. But maybe before I do that, why don't we open up and see if there's any questions right now that we can just make it a little more interactive with. I think we have 8 attendees right now so far, and maybe if you want to unmute and see if anyone wants to maybe have a 10-minute interactive discussion now, and then I'll kind of get into inventory assessments and a model that we can all use.
Sure. I am unmuting. I'm giving you all permission to talk, so you can unmute yourself if you have a question. Anybody have a question at this point?
Yeah, or even a statement or your thoughts so far of what you heard, or if you concur or if you disagree, you know, but what are some of your thoughts?
This is CJ, definitely in agreement.
Excellent.
Good. We have some chats. So Alexander says, I'm really appreciating what I'm hearing and looking forward to the assessments portion. And then Drew says, can you go back to the panel showing the different fallacies? Do you remember? Let's see. Let me see if I can go back real quick.
Yeah, I think it was, I'll tell you which one.
Was it one of the case studies?
No, it was the Vijay Govindarajan. I think he was saying about why do companies fail, slide 18.
Got it.
Yeah. That one.
Yeah.
So the different fallacies, the physical trap, the psychological trap, and the strategic trap. And it is tough. It's tough when in hiring practices, you hire somebody and you spend a lot of time going through panel interviews and everything. The candidate, for whatever reason, doesn't work out. Do you cut the cord or do you double down? The draft, we talk about the NFL draft, NBA, any draft. You draft a player and you invest time in them. You cut the cord, double down. Look at Chicago Bears if you're a football fan. They drafted Mitch Trubisky very high in the draft. In fact, they drafted him ahead of Patrick Mahomes. And of course, nobody has a crystal ball. Nobody knew what was going to happen. What did they do now this year or over in the offseason? They picked up Nick Foles, who won a Super Bowl and was the backup in Philadelphia and was with other teams after that. But it's very difficult, I think. So I'm glad somebody brought that up. There are tangible reasons why companies just don't want to do something different. Polaroid, Xerox, all these companies we're talking about just don't want to do something. And a lot of it's comfort, a lot of it's fear of changing. Change management is challenging. How do you get a key stakeholder to respond to a potential unknown or threat? Very difficult. I would say the basic premise I have, so the question that someone posed is, how do you get a key stakeholder to respond to a potential unknown threat? To me, facts and data. So to the extent that there's facts and data, now whether or not somebody will still go along, don't know. Even when you look at COVID and everything that happened with that, apparently the first case of somebody dying in the United States happened, I want to say February 6th or somewhere around that time frame, which means that individual must have been affected sometime by mid-January in the domestic United States. And why is it we only finally basically closed up the country in mid-March? Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's very difficult to do that. And to the question about how do you get a stakeholder to respond to an unknown threat, I'll ask the question back to the group. How did it play out? Ultimately, the National Basketball Association, Rudy Gobert tested positive, the first player in the NBA to test positive. The NBA shut down, then all the other leagues shut down, and then essentially the country shut down. And it was this big trickle effect. But somebody had to have the courage to basically say there's something more important than ringing the cash register. There's something more important than our bottom line and our profits. There's a higher ethical priority, that there is actually real harm that's happening. And so I think facts and data for sure. And then I think trying to be steadfast into what are your values and staying true to your values. People won't know this at all, I would assume, but Pepperdine University, I'm on, of course, a professor there and an alum and all that, but I'm also on the board of visitors for the Graduate School of Education and Psychology. Last Friday, a week ago today, Jim Nash, the president of the university, who took over for Andy Benton, who was there for 20 years. He took over just 9 months ago. So now he has unprecedented times, obviously, for everyone, and he's a fairly new university president. He mentioned that as soon as this stuff happened and everything, even though contractually they can keep the money from, the people that have dorm rooms and things like that, he told all of his teams and his leadership to give all the money back. And it wasn't even a thought or a consideration. And then it goes back to, well, what were his values? And what are the values of the institution, and what were his values? And then he stuck to that. So that's how I would respond to that. How do you get a key stakeholder to respond to potential known threat? I think stay true to your values and then try to convince them with facts and data. Okay, more questions or comments? Otherwise, we'll start going through the assessments and some of that stuff.
This is such an important slide because right here, when you've invested in technology, you don't want to move on to another tool. Like, you just got everyone trained on this tool. You don't want to put money into a new tool, but technology is advancing so quickly and it's becoming so much more efficient, every moment. And so, and then here too, sometimes all of us are with Leadership Long Beach. It's been around for 30 years. So now, and it's been working successful for 30 years. So it's so hard to try to change anything because we know it works, but then what do leaders need for the future? So I love this last one of and your example of what you guys do at Raytheon you're imagining technologies that don't even exist. So
Yep, spiral developments. Yep, it's very real. We really do that. So
all right, is there any other comments, questions from the group? Sorry, I quit the share.
Okay, so let's continue on. I think you're on slide now 21.
Right here?
Watson, I think one behind that. I wonder if your slides are different than my slides. Yeah, that one. Okay. In fact, go back one slide so that they can see that that's the natural next slide. There you go. So inventory and assessments. So Watson, Glasser, critical thinking appraisal. So what is this? It was developed in 1925. This is considered the gold standard of critical thinking tests. It's the premier tool for evaluating the cognitive ability of professionals. It was introduced by Pearson Talent Lens in the UK. It's administered by employers as either an online test or a paper-based test. And they used to have an old form that would take, it was 80 questions in 60 minutes, and there's a newer, shorter variation that's 40 questions in 20 to 30 minutes. And it's the test itself split into 5 sections. So far, and that number is even outdated, but now it's more than 25,000 people have taken this assessment. Next. Heighten, critical thinking assessment. So it's an assessment administered as a single 45-minute test. Each test taker takes 26 questions. They have an analytic skills section and a synthetic skills section. And it's assessed by ETS, the nonprofit ETS, and it's deemed one of the most important and necessary, that's critical thinking is deemed as one of the most important necessary skills for graduates, college graduates, endeavoring to become contributors in the global marketplace. So that's the premise of the belief system of this group or organization. Next. The CAT test, the critical thinking's assessment test, developed with input from faculty at Tennessee Tech University across a wide range of institutions and disciplines. Over 250 institutions across the country have used the CAT program and general education assessment. It was developed to assess a broad range of skills that faculty across the country feel are important, designed to emulate real-world problems, and engages faculty in the assessment and improvement of student critical thinking skills. Most students complete it in 30 to 45 minutes. Bloom's taxonomy. So some people may have studied this depending on your educational background and if you've studied psychology. But Benjamin Bloom, born in 1913, passed away in 1999. Yeah, he was an American educational psychologist and had a PhD in education. And he directed a new research team which conducted a major investigation into the development of exceptional talent. And according to them, the foundation was remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. And so in this framework, which has been applied by generations of K through 12 teachers and college instructors, this is what was created and still around. Next. So insight assessments, there's different assessments and different flavors of assessments. This was established in 1986 by Dr. Peter Facioni, who was a pioneer in the quest to demonstrate empirically that a consensus understanding of critical thinking can be attained, and that the core cognitive skills and centrally important dispositional habits of critical thinking can be learned, taught, and assessed. That critical thinking skills and people were not born, but they can be made, if you will. So to that end, these are 4 different tests: the BCTST, BCTST-N with numeracy, BAI, and the BRT. These are not sold to individuals. You must be affiliated with an institution for any of these. So now I have a slide on each of these. So what is the business critical thinking skills test? It's designed to evaluate the critical thinking skills of MBA students, undergraduate business students, and working professionals. Items require no real business knowledge. They're set in a familiar business related context. Next. Now this is the dash, oh no, this is the same one. It's just another slide on it. Yeah. Now the one numeracy, which offers advantage of what we just talked about, and the advantage of assessing numeracy skills in addition to assessing an expanded list of critical thinking skills. So the theories of business students or professionals don't have both thinking and numeracy skills. They may not have the skills necessary to excel in today's business climate. So this one has 35 questions, provides a score on the analysis, interpretation, interference, evaluation, explanation, and deduction of overall reasoning skills. Next. Business attribute inventory. The theories employers need people who are both willing and able to think, designed to evaluate the full spectrum of job candidates, from those applying for seasonal or temporary or part-time work to those applying to full-time work. It measures the desire and intention to use one's critical thinking skills to identify, interpret, and resolve workplace problems and issues. And continued. And next. The business reasoning test, calibrated to measure the critical thinking skills required for entry-level, part-time, or temporary jobs. And it supports smart hiring, job placement, and performance evaluation, provides the potential employer with valuable information about the core reasoning and problem-solving skills. So that should be...
Did you see a question came through, Shreyas?
Oh, okay.
How do you adjust for cultural biases that are often associated with standardized tests?
So that's a good and valid question. And the way I would respond to that is I would say that the test, as with anything, which what we would say is quantitative methods, it provides a reference point or a framework or a lens, and then the actual person administering the test needs to then take that in context, is how I would respond. So that's not something that's done automatically per se. Sometimes there's I've seen on assessment tests that up front there's questions of demographics, where folks will write what is their ethnicity, what's their age, what's their gender, and things like that. And then there's an actual, what do you call it, a baseline that it can get compared against with people of that ethnicity, gender, race, and whatnot. So that is a way to normalize, if you will, the data and to compare against a baseline. But not everyone does that. So then the other way is just for those asking questions anytime that there's quantitative methods, for the evaluator, the researcher, the one conducting the study to sit down and think about what does it mean, for example. So if someone's assessing weather patterns, for example, and they were in Los Angeles 3 weeks ago and it rained every day, all 5 days, and they were only here for 5 days, and then they went back home to wherever they went back home, they might write a paper and say it always rains in California. But in what context? 3 weeks ago, sure, it did rain for the 5 days they were here. So it's really taking things within the context. And that's where the individual doing it, if they don't have the baseline to compare against, then to take it within context. So that's why with most assessments, demographic information is collected. And I would say it plays a role. And in an ideal case, there's mixed methods. And then in addition to this assessment, which is a data point or it's information, then there's an actual interview. And then so now there's the qualitative methods. Now there's an opportunity to ask scenarios and real world questions and to start gauging the responses in that regard. So good question. Next. Okay, so here's a model to improve your critical thinking skills. And it's called the Pearson's Red Critical Thinking Skills Model. I like it because it's very simple. Simple things I think work best because they're very easy to remember and very easy to follow. And so if you want to think critically, think red. How do you think red? You recognize assumptions. What are your personal biases? Things like that. Evaluate arguments and then draw conclusions. And so the red model lays out a path for understanding how critical thinking works and for developing each of the essential critical thinking skills. Okay, next.
This is a good tool to think about cultural intelligence, because right here, if you're recognizing your bias, that's a great way to start with making sure that these tools are inclusive.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Recognizing, we won't go through each of those. So, but, and you can make feel free to make the slides available for folks to go through that at their own leisure. And then in summary, critical thinking in the workplace. In fact, I'm gonna pull that up on my thing because that's very small on my phone. 1 second. Okay. So research conducted in recent years by Pearson, as well as by a variety of independent academics, has shown people who score well on critical thinking assessments are also rated by the supervisors having the following. And you can see all the stuff: creativity, job knowledge, good job performance, and so on. Critical thinking is the lifeblood of the most essential workplace skills, including problem solving, decision making, good judgment, sound analysis. Organizations that can attract, retain, and develop the best critical thinkers have a significant and measurable competitive advantage. I put aerospace and defense industry, but any industry, automotive, manufacturing, business world, and so on and so forth, healthcare. And that's it. I think the last slide is just contact information of mine. But let's have an interactive discussion. Either we can continue having that, or I know Dr. Cisna, you might have some prompt questions as well. So.
Yeah, I want to open it up for any of you guys to have questions. I also want to go back to Bloom's taxonomy and just point out, I'm still new to Leadership Long Beach, but I'm learning their curriculum, and I definitely think they follow this. Maybe not through Bloom, but I think they're very intentional about each class you're learning things, and at the end it culminates with a class project. So the class comes together and produces their own original work. And so you can kind of see they're exposed to new ideas, they learn information, then they start to analyze their own leadership and the team's leadership, and they make decisions based on the needs in the community, and then they create this project. And so far we have over 130 class projects that have gone out in the community. So I'm really excited that we already kind of use this model for critical thinking, and we teach leaders that. But I would love to open it up and hear from anyone who has any comments about any of these slides or any questions or thoughts. We have leaders throughout the city actually that are on this webinar today. So we'd love to just hear from you if you want to tell us where you are currently leading and any thoughts you have on critical thinking. I was kind of like, Shreyas, doesn't everybody already know about critical thinking? And he's like, no, this is a huge need. It's the #1 need. And when I thought about it, I'm like, it's true. When you think about the problems in our world, they can all kind of be traced back to avoiding this. We need people to be thinking critically. So thank you for bringing all these different examples. And right now with COVID-19, we're all being forced to stop and start reimagining the way that we do things.
Yeah, I was thinking, in fact, you and I talked briefly about this, but back when we were growing up, there were still drive-in theaters. A&W, root beer A&W company, they would have, you'd drive up, you push a button like Sonic, you push a button and they bring the food out to your root beer float. I think we're going to have a wave where we're going to start getting drive-in theaters back, and we're going to start, because of social distancing. I think social distancing is here to stay. I've already seen models of airline seats going forward, backward, or I've seen different models of different things of just where social distancing is here to stay, and how can it be implemented while at the same time not sacrificing people's personal freedoms and their opportunities to enjoy and maximize our collective experience, while we're alive and while we're here.
Wow. Well, I hope that we still get to meet in person, because I miss all of you and I want to hug you in person and have more conversations with you in person. But I really just want to thank you, Dr. Gandhi, for joining us and for this awesome presentation. And you just gave us so many tangible ways to start thinking critically and start to dream differently, which we will all be I will be implementing, and I know.
And actually, one thing I'll say, one more thing, which is, I don't watch much TV at all. Frankly, don't have a lot of time to watch that. Even now, when we're all working telecommuting and everything, I genuinely don't watch television at all. But one show I tried to watch is the Shark Tank. And one thing I want to bring up in the context of what we were just talking about is with the Shark Tank, actually each and every individual or family that comes there and presents their idea, they have applied some modicum of critical thinking, because they have an idea that they now want to launch and make something big. And obviously they need to sell that idea to 5 folks that are, financially astute and that have connections. And so my lens whenever I'm watching the Shark Tank is, wow, that was cool, or that was a great idea, or that's something. And these are folks that are, there's an actual problem that they have experienced in one way, shape, or form, and they are trying to solve that problem and then monetize that, of course. But the Shark Tank's a very good example of an application of critical thinking skills with almost every presentation. So I just wanted to bring that up.
It's such an educational show. You're right. You can learn so much. All right. If no one has any questions or comments, then we will go ahead and finish a little bit early. Dr. Gandhi, we hope you can get out under the water soon. We want you to start scuba diving. And I'm so sad that you can't be underwater right now. So I hope to get underwater and experience what you mentioned earlier, just that Zen kind of relaxing meditative moment. We do have one more question. What's the best way to be an ambassador for critical thinking?
The best way to be an ambassador for critical thinking. I think, obviously, well, I should never use the word obviously, but I believe folks need to lead by example. And so I can say, for example, Northrop Grumman Company, they're our competitor of Raytheon. Now we're called Raytheon Technologies, or Boeing, or Lockheed Martin. That's our space. When applying to a management position at Northrop Grumman, they actually require all candidates to do an assessment. An assessment can take 40, 50 minutes to even be considered to have an interview, by the way. That's one forcing function, right? Is, hey, you want to be part of this company, then you're going to do this. And so one way to be, the best way to be an ambassador, if I want someone to get fit, then I better be fit. Is to study up and maybe look through some of these models and maybe even see if you can take an assessment and look through some of these models and educate yourself, and then to just to wear that on your sleeve on everything you're doing. With engineers, I can say one challenge that we have within the engineering community in general is engineers like to go from problem to solution, and critical thinking forces you not to do that. Why did it happen? What are possible reasons that it happened? How can you prevent it from happening again? And you go through a process. And so one way to be an example is really to just not cut the process short. Try your best to not go from problem to solution. And if others are trying to do that, stop them from doing that.
Good reminder. It's an iterative process. Like it builds. So you got to take the time
Yeah.
to really think and let yourself explore. And you have to be open, because that's the hard thing too. It's sometimes we're not open.
Absolutely.
All right. I think that's it. There's no more
Well,
questions.
thank you for that question. I
Yeah.
appreciate you, and I appreciate everyone for participating today. Thank you.
Thanks for being here, Dr. G. You did a great job.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Jill says, I read an article about Finland teaching critical thinking starting in kindergarten after Russia tried to hack their elections with misinformation. It was considered a vital skill for today's social media. I think that's the biggest problem we're seeing, right? Yeah. What are your thoughts?
Even in engineering, when I went to engineering school, this is how old I am. We didn't get email even till my second year as an electrical engineering student at UC Irvine. We didn't even have an email address, right? So things evolve obviously over time, and things are very different. Right now, there's such a big wave on cybersecurity and cybersecurity threats, just like this school in Finland talking about hacking and things like that. The next generation of leaders, even within our company, we require them to have some modicum of background into threats, into cybersecurity, into things of that nature. So chess, my older son is a national master in chess, and he teaches chess, and he went to college on a chess scholarship. So there's a lot of schools that have actually put chess into their curriculum, actually. And when, in fact, you and I had talked about this almost 10 years ago, Carrie, but they had put chess into their curriculum. Why did they do that? Because what they found out with chess is that it not only helps in math and science, which is sort of, you can say, obvious, there's connections and things like that, but it actually helped in all subjects. Because folks that are sitting there in a chessboard and across each other are having patience to do that, they started developing patience with reading and other things. And so there has started to be studies on that. So what they're doing in Finland is fantastic. I think just in general, exploring different ideas against the norm. I think that's the basic premise of critical thinking. And it doesn't mean that you have to do something different, by the way. But it's just having the open-mindedness, like Southwest Airlines. Why do you have to have a seat assignment? Just having the open-mindedness to challenge the norm, to think why, with everything, why, and then coming back to that. I appreciate that example. That's a very good example about Finland, and it reminded me about chess being put in so many schools. And why was it? It was actually because it was helping with all academics. So it was interesting. It's a very interesting study.
And with what you're saying too, like it's all about challenging the norm. You have to first realize that there is a norm. And that's why I liked with your acronym RED to start with, like, what are your assumptions? Because it's like, it's realizing, I have a worldview that I feel is normal. And you can't challenge that if you're not even aware of that in the first place.
Right. Absolutely.
Interesting. Well, I love that your son is winning at chess. Were you looking behind you to see his like trophies? Because all we see is your Pepperdine background.
That's okay. He had 70 chess trophies by the time he was 7 years old.
Wait, you cut out. What did you say?
Well. I last played him years ago when he beat me blindfolded. I said that he received 70 chess trophies for his 7 years old, and I last played him 4 years ago when he beat me. Maybe we have a bad connection because I think you're frozen a little bit. Is it cutting in and out, Carrie?
Yeah, I heard you say he won 70 chess competitions before he was 7 years old, and then he beat you blindfolded?
On 2 boards, looks like some people can still hear, but yeah, he beat me blindfolded on 2 boards because the chessboard has A through H and 1 through 8. So you can call out the positions of the knight B2, bishop B4 like that, and he just played literally blindfolded.
Wow.
But anyways, appreciate your time. Thank you, everyone. We'll let everyone get back to... somebody said, what is a practical way to improve critical thinking skills daily? And then they said sorry and bye. But Daily, I would say, actually, honestly, something as simple as Sudoku, as dumb as that sounds. I like different brain exercises. I personally like brain exercises. So it could be something as simple as a crossword puzzle, Sudoku, something that continues to do that. And by the way, it could be something more subtle as just taking a walk, quite honestly. I've been walking 6 miles a day. And a lot of times when I'm walking, it's like I'm scuba diving in the sense that it's fairly quiet. No one's around, no one's talking. And then you have an opportunity to, answers come to you, at least to me. So, I think trying to disengage from the norm, I think, are things that will help, in addition to maybe doing Sudoku and doing other stuff from a practical sense. But I think doing something meditative, doing yoga, something meditative, those are different ways as well. Or just, taking a walk, several walks. So.
Good reminders. Well, all of us should go take a walk today or do some sort of crossword puzzle or something. We should practice it. So thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Alexandra. Thank you all.
See you online. If you guys, I will post his information. We'll post this on our YouTube channel, and you guys can follow him on social media or LinkedIn. But thank you for being here, and we look forward to seeing you guys next week. We will have a Fireside Chat, same time, same place. We will be online Friday at noon with David Yoon, who did all of the social media for a lot of movies, including Top Gun that just came out, and he did Venom, and he did A Star is Born. So he's going to be talking about work from home teams, because he leads all of his teams work from home, and they make the social media for movies. So we will look forward to seeing you guys next week to talk about working from home. All right. Bye, Shreyas. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a good day. Bye.
Bye.